Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony, which today commemorates the 75th anniversary of the fall of Rabaul. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Commodore Mark Sackley. We are honoured to acknowledge Vice Admiral Yutaka Murakawa, Chief of Staff, Japan Maritime Defence Force, Rear Admiral Michael Noon, Deputy Chief of Navy, Royal Australian Navy, and the accompanying delegation, Mr Gordon Ramsay, ACT Minister for Veterans and Seniors, and Mr Peter Everly, President, ACT Branch, Returned and Services League. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from around Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. I invite you all now to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. Please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today marks the 75th anniversary of the Japanese invasion of New Britain and the fall of Rabaul, which took place on the 23rd of January 1942. This evening, we remember and pay tribute to Private Leslie Macdonald, who died as a prisoner of war following the fall of Rabaul. The son of a gold miner, Leslie George Macdonald was born on the 31st of August 1918 in Ararat, in southwest Victoria, to Hugh and Rose Macdonald. Although little is known of his early life, by the time the Second World War began, the Macdonald family was living in Melbourne, suburb of Brunswick, where Leslie worked as a labourer. He enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 7th of June 1940, giving his name as George Leslie, rather than Leslie George Macdonald for reasons that are unclear. Shortly after his enlistment, Macdonald was posted to the newly raised 2nd 22nd Battalion of the Australian 8th Division, joining the battalion's Delta Company. The 2nd 22nd Battalion carried out much of its training in Rabaul, in central Victoria and Bonegilla, on the Victoria-New South Wales border. In mid-April 1941, Macdonald and the rest of his battalion embarked from Sydney for the sea voyage to Rabaul, New Britain. Rabaul was the administrative centre for Australia's mandated territories in New Guinea. The 2nd 22nd Battalion formed part of the small force codenamed Lark Force, which was sent to protect the airfields and seaplane anchorage on New Britain and to provide early warning of Japanese movement through the islands. Much of the soldiers' time on New Britain was spent training and preparing the island's defences. There were few amenities for the troops, entertainment or relaxation, and Macdonald soon ran afoul of military regulations. In addition to 2 earlier convictions of having gone absent without leave in Australia, in Rabaul he was charged with a variety of offences, such as failing to obey camp standing orders and stealing a bottle of beer. In July, he was convicted of failing to obey a lawful command and was sentenced to 112 days detention. He was sent by sea to Queensland to serve his sentence in a Brisbane detention barracks before returning to Rabaul in mid-November, where he continued his pattern of going absent without leave, ignoring commands and being confined to barracks. The Japanese, meanwhile, had begun to advance across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. In early January 1942, the Japanese began aerial attacks on New Britain, quickly overwhelming the Australian airmen who engaged them. The invasion of Rabaul began on the 23rd of January with an amphibious landing. Some 5,000 Japanese troops overpowered the 1,400 soldiers of Lark Force. The force's commander infamously ordered the Australian withdrawal along the lines of every man for himself. Unprepared for a retreat, the force disintegrated into small groups. Some 400 members of Lark Force, included 300 men from the 2nd 22nd Battalion, managed to escape to Australia. At Toll Plantation and Watatalo, however, the Japanese massacred around 160 Australians. More than 800 Australians became prisoner of war. Macdonald was amongst the prisoners at Rabaul. On the 7th of March, he died in captivity from malaria. He was 23 years old. A grim fate awaited the remaining prisoners from the 2nd 22nd Battalion and Lark Force. They were among the more than 1,000 Australian prisoners of war and civilian internees who died when the Montevideo Maru, a Japanese merchant ship transporting prisoners from Rabaul to Hainan Island, was sunk by an American submarine on the 1st of July. Private Macdonald's name is listed on the Roll of Honour to my left. Among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Leslie George Macdonald, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.